Hi, everyone. Like Adam just mentioned, my name is Samiul Huque. I'm a senior software engineer at Bloomberg. I work on IB, which is Bloomberg's instant messaging application. I'm a full-stack developer. I primarily code in Python and JavaScript. And the title of my talk, if you came to a Python conference, now go do a PR review. I thought about this because I've been to conferences before, and I wanted to make sure that I gave a talk that I felt would be actionable. I think if you're at a conference right now, either you or your company, they've put a lot of investment in you to be able to travel and come here and listen to all these speakers talk about everything. I wanted to make sure that I talked about something where you could go back to your work and immediately be able to apply something. So I hope you guys are able to take something actionable out of this talk. And I decided to focus on PR reviews because I think PR reviews is kind of an overlooked way that you can make impact as an engineer. And I'm going to be talking about the unique opportunities PR reviews give you, as well as what to look out for specifically in Python to kind of make the most out of it. So really quickly, the agenda. We're going to talk briefly about why PR reviews are important, and like I said, the unique opportunity they provide to make an impact. We're going to talk about the 3 archetypes of bad code reviewers and why each is kind of insufficient in their own way. And then the bulk of it will go into talking about Python-specific knowledge that you can use when you do PR reviews. And then we're going to wrap up with kind of technical communication, how best to convey that technical knowledge that you have. So really quickly, why PR reviews? They boost code quality and team learning. It's a way for you to be able to teach and mentor other people on your team. It helps catch bugs early. We know that a lot of people sometimes commit and merge code that ends up rolling out to production and causes bugs or other crashes. If you're a good, high-quality senior engineer and you're doing good code reviews, you can catch bugs before they roll out. Mentorship and collaboration. Engineers need to do a lot of that, and PR reviews is a very specific and clean way of providing mentorship. Not only is it like specific, but it's also kind of documented, where the mentorship that you provide ends up being like in the PR comment, so it's kind of documented what you've done and how you've helped people grow. It's also critical for scaling projects. We'll talk about this briefly later on, but as an engineer, there's only so much code that you can write yourself. But if you're trying to make a big, broad impact, then not only is it about the code that you're writing, but it's about the code that you're helping other people write to move out to production, and PR reviews helps you do that. And then, I guess, related to that is just scaling your individual contributions. There's only so much design you could do on your own. There's only so much code you can do on your own. But if you're doing PR reviews effectively, you're able to do that with multiple people on your team or in your department or whoever it is you're doing PR reviews for. So what is unique about Python code reviews? Well, one thing is that Python is dynamic. So in order to do code reviews properly, you kind of need more context, and you need to put in more scrutiny into the code that you're looking at. We'll look into specifics in a little bit. Python is idiomatic. I think all engineers know that there's not one right way to do something, but there's multiple correct ways to get something working. But with Python, not only do you want to make sure that whatever code you have works, but you also want to make sure that it's Pythonic and that it's written in a standardized way. And then the other thing is that Python has batteries included. What that means is that Python has a very rich standard library. So there's really not, engineers like to kind of solve problems, which means you might be solving a problem that someone already has a solution to. But by understanding the standard library and what it could do, it kind of helps you not write a lot of new code where you can just use a library. So to kind of go into a bit of a detail about what I was talking about, Python is idiomatic. You can see on the left, there's a less Pythonic index loop. And on the right, there's a more Pythonic using enumerate. So I think writing idiomatic Python helps to make sure that your code base has some degree of standardization. Like I was just saying, there's multiple ways of doing something, but if you do it the Pythonic way, you make sure that your code has standardization where it's easier to review, it's easier for a new person to come in and understand what's going on, and it's just less context for you to be able to manage. Python has batteries included, so the 2 code blocks on the left and right show the same thing being done, but you can see that on the right, the with statement allows for a lot less code and a lot fewer lines, and this becomes important because if you have an outage or a bug or some other issue, the fewer lines of code you need to look at, the easier you can catch your bugs, and the easier you can fix whatever is broken. It's also less context for you to maintain while you're doing the code review. It's less context for you to maintain in your head while you're looking at code. So now that we've kind of covered a high level of what I was talking about, I think it's helpful to go into the archetypes of bad reviewers. I think if you're an engineer, you've probably gotten a review, you've given reviews. I think there's kind of specific high level buckets of what I consider to be bad reviewers, and I'm going to go into that right now. But really quickly, the three, they're kind of the looks good to me reviewer, there's the technical nitpicker, and there's the nit commenter. So the looks good to me reviewer, they kind of just say LGTM and approve your code review without really giving you a lot of feedback or saying anything else. They might leave vague and unhelpful comments. They don't really engage with your code, the logic, the design, or the edge cases, and they could miss bugs or opportunities for improvement, and they don't really offer any feedback that helps you grow. I think if you're sitting here and you're thinking, well, I've reviewed code and I didn't really see any issues, or the logic looked fine, I think even if that is the case, I personally find it helpful just to say what it is that I looked at, because if the code might be great, but the person writing the code might not know. They might think there's an issue, they might think there could be something wrong. So I think even if you do a review where everything looks good and you just want to approve it, put the check mark, and let it go, I think it's helpful just to say, here's what I looked at, here's the logic that I see you doing, and just confirming with them what you see. And then that way it gives them the opportunity to do two things. One, they can know that you understood the code the way the writer intended it to be, which will kind of give them more confidence and have it just make more sense when it rolls out. But also, you might understand something slightly differently than how they intended it to be. So if you put in those comments, it helps them be able to kind of have a back and forth with you. The other thing is the technical nitpicker. They tend to focus on minor or irrelevant issues like variable naming or personal styling. They might kind of overwhelm the PR with a lot of low impact comments that don't really help the logic or whatever the code is trying to do. It creates a lot of work for the person that made the PR without really improving a lot of the code quality or improving the robustness when it rolls out. And then it just kind of discourages contribution because it makes the person who's getting reviewed think there's a lot of things wrong with their code. I think the biggest takeaway for me for the technical nitpicker is that you might be correct, but you kind of miss the forest from the trees, and that you might find a lot of things that could be improved, but the way that you're saying it, it just doesn't really land. So I think for this case, the few recommendations I have is to use CI tools, where if you find yourself making the same stylistic kind of nitpicks, you can just use a CI tool to automate that away a bit. That way, before they even make the PR, they can see it themselves. And the other thing is kind of batching the feedback that you give. So if you feel like there's a lot of technical nitpicks that you want to do, you can have kind of the first batch of comments that you give be more about the design, the logic, the high-level stuff, is the code actually working, and then you can kind of batch all of the nits together. So the person who's making the PR doesn't need to worry about whether or not there's more issues coming or if there's a bunch of other things wrong. And then the next one is the nit commenter. I think for this one, it's the person that delivers good feedback, but then the person that have good feedback to give you, but their delivery is kind of not where it should be, so it ruins the impact that you got. So they might point out real issues, but they might not be able to give you enough feedback. I think for this one, it's what I've seen is that someone might say, hey, this is an issue, you need to fix this. Without giving you two things, they might not say why it's an issue, or they might not say how you can fix it. So I think it's one thing to point out what an issue is, but I think we've all been in a position where we might have gotten a PR comment, someone has asked us to change something, but we have no idea why. And if you're the person giving that review, I think it's important to know that you might be correct, but you want to convey why you're correct. So not just leaving comments like, nit, this is inefficient, but maybe explaining, oh, you're using this loop here, this loop might be better, so do this instead. So I think part of this is just being able to give more feedback and sharing the knowledge that you already have. So those were kind of the three technical archetypes of bad code reviewers. I'm going to go into what I think is kind of not foundational Python knowledge, but a lot of Python issues I see come up when I do code reviews for new Python developers, and I think it sometimes can be overlooked, but I think it's important to consider. One thing is Python's object model. Python is not passed by reference. It's not passed by value, but it's passed by object reference, or it's Python variables they reference objects. If you come from another language like C++, you kind of might be familiar with pass by value, pass by reference, but Python does it a little bit differently. So before we go into it, it's important to know about the difference between immutable types and mutable types. When reviewing code, you just need to ask yourself, will the object that's being passed into this function or this block of code, is it changing? And if it is changing, is that change intentional? And to kind of keep that in mind, The immutable types, so types that cannot be changed, are ints, strings, and tuples. And the types that can be changed, the mutable types, are lift, dicts, and sets. So to go into that a bit, there is a function here that takes a list, and you can see that it updates the list in real time. So it's mutating the list that's being passed in. But if you're reviewing code like this, you want to ask yourself, is this intentional? And there's really no way to know whether or not the person writing the code intend for it to be mutated or not. You might need to leave a comment in the PR. You might need to have a discussion with them offline. But this already kind of shows you an example of why it's not the best to do something like this. So adding on to that, in addition, there's also default mutable args that you can pass in. On the left, you can see that I'm passing in an empty list, and on the right, I'm passing in none. One of them is better than the other. And if I go on to the next slide, you can see that on the left, every single time you call the function, it's essentially keeping state where the list is growing. But on the right, instead of passing in an empty list, if you pass in none, it won't keep state. So the function will essentially work the way you intend it to, where state isn't being kept over different function calls, but it's doing what you want it to do without reusing the old state. So potential bugs that can come up with the code that I was showing before, if you're sharing state across function calls, it just means that the default list is created once, so subsequent calls modify the same list. You may or may not always want to do that. Another thing is that there's non-obvious behavior in loops or tests, especially if you're doing things like API calls. Your tests, or your, not tests, but like your actual production code might be behaving in a way that you're not thinking about because state is being passed around. And it's also hard to track side effects. If you're a viewer, you might not notice that state is being preserved, but you need to really watch out for the data structure that's being passed in and whether or not the default arg being passed in is something that's going to preserve state or give you a new state. So if you're a viewer, just kind of insights to keep in mind are check for default mutable arguments in function definitions. If you have a lift, if you have a dict, if you have a set, pay careful attention to that. And then if you see it, just ask yourself, should this be a fresh variable every time? Or if this state that's being preserved, is that intentional? Many Python developers, even experienced one, they either don't know this or don't know how to look out for it. So it's just something to keep in mind. The next thing is efficient and idiomatic Python. So Python, like I was saying before, engineers know that there's a lot of ways to solve a problem, but with Python, there's often Python-specific ways to solve that problem. And so you should be asking yourself, not only does this code work, but also how is it written, and is it written in a Pythonic way? One example of that is loops versus comprehensions. You can see on the left, we're using a loop. On the right, we're using a comprehension. And it's not just about being Pythonic just for the sake of being Pythonic if you're writing Python, but you can see on the right, there are fewer lines of code. It expresses your intent more clearly, and it's usually faster too because different compilers can optimize Pythonic code differently where it runs faster. Another example is map and filter versus comprehensions. The code on the right, it's easier to read for most Python developers. It avoids the anonymous lambda function on the left. And again, it's just more Pythonic, and it's more useful in modern code bases. Another thing we're going to be talking about is generators. Generators provide lazy evaluation. So they're memory efficient for large data sets. They're composable with built-in tools like iter tools. And they're great use cases for when you're having things like APIs or when you're doing log ingestion. So on the right, you can see that we're using a generator. It might look like it's still one line of code, but there are benefits to the code on the right. I think if you're using generators, if you're doing a PR review and you see there being a loop and it's pulling in some kind of data, you can just ask yourself, could I use a generator here? If you see a list or another large data collection, you can ask yourself, would a generator being used here save any memory? Or is there a more expressive and less error-prone way of doing it? And usually generators help you do that. The other thing that I talked about is using the Python standard library. Like I was saying before, you might be solving a problem that has already been solved for you, but Python comes with batteries included. But it's just that many devs don't use them because they either don't know that it exists or they don't feel confident using it. But if you're doing a PR review and you see something where it looks like they solve a problem that has been done before, you want to kind of make sure you call that out, but you can only do that if you know about the Python standard library. So a few ones that I like to keep in mind when I'm doing code reviews is using pathlib over ofpath. Both of these look like they're 2 lines of code, and you can't really see the difference just based on this screenshot. But the one on the right, it kind of has cleaner syntax with the slash operator. The pathlib gives you more methods than you can get with just ofpath on its own. With pathlib, you have things like retext. You can have a function called to see if something exists. You can convert something into a glob, sorry, and it's just better for more cross-platform safety. Another example of the Python standard library is default dict. On the left, we have an example where someone is doing some code using empty dictionary that they create themselves. And on the right, they're doing the same thing, but they're using default dict. The code on the right is slightly shorter, not too much shorter, but shorter enough to make a meaningful difference if you're managing a lot of other contexts. But it does kind of like 3 important things. It removes boilerplate. Like on the left, you can see that they're checking to see if keys are not in there. But on the right, where they're using default dict, you don't need to do that because that's built in for you with default dict. So it removes boilerplate. It just makes it safer and shorter. Again, you don't need to do all of these checks. And there's other functionality that default dict provides as well. So that's one other thing to keep in mind. But if you're doing a PR review and you see someone using a dict and you see someone checking for if key not in dict, you can consider whether or not using default dict would be helpful in that situation. And then another thing is type annotations. With type annotations, it makes code easier to understand and maintain. It enables static analysis, so you can run static analysis tools either locally or in CI, like MyPy or Pyrite, and then it just encourages your API to be cleaner. I think this isn't something that I've seen be fully taken advantage of, but I think it's one of the tools in Python that makes for a lot more maintainable code long term. So whenever I'm doing PR reviews, I always try to see whether or not someone can use a type annotation, and 99% of the time they can, because at the end of the day, you're kind of just writing functions. Another thing is data class. On the left, it shows us creating a class the standard way using init, and on the right, it's showing us use data class. If you're writing code where you need to think about a data structure, not necessarily a class that has methods or other functions, if you're just storing data, a data class is usually a much better way of doing it. It's because A, it removes boilerplate, so you don't need to do things like init or other functions that you might need in an actual class. It also encourages more structured thinking. I think with a class, you have much more flexibility, so you can get away with doing things that you might not necessarily want to do. But if you're using a data class, you're kind of forced to think in the structured data format pattern. So it ends up being much more helpful if you're just creating objects that are meant to store data and not be interactive and have function calls. It's also, just going back to it really quickly, it also signals to the reader that this thing is meant to just hold data. It's not managed to have behavior. So if you use a data class, that's just one additional thing that you're signaling. And again, it's just less context for you to maintain. I think one of the things with not just PR reviews, but having maintainable code bases, you just want to make sure that there's fewer context you need to keep in your head, and all of the context that you want is just more relevant just based on reading the code, or obvious by reading the code. Cool. So that is kind of the bulk of the technical knowledge that I want to talk about when doing PR reviews. The last part right now is about the communication related to it. I think there's a few principles I like to keep in mind when I'm giving feedback in PR reviews. They're clarity, respect, specificity, and just explaining why. For clarity, I think you want to make sure you say what you mean and you want to be concrete. You might look at a piece of code and you might have seen a problem, or you might see an error that the person who made it haven't thought about. I think if you're doing a PR review and you catch something, I've seen a lot of people kind of put the onus back on the PR writer, where they say, oh, hey, I found something wrong with this. Do you see an issue with it? I think that's fine from time to time. That might be even fine for like more junior engineers. But I think if, depending on the other engineer that you're doing that review for, depending on the timeline of whatever project you're working on, I found that's often more constructive to just say what you mean, where you're like, hey, this is the issue, this is what I think might happen, have you thought about this? And if you're concrete and if you're specific, that often helps the person getting the review be able to come to you and have a conversation. And ultimately, at the end of the day, with PR reviews, you just want to facilitate a conversation, get whatever things clarified, and then move on. The other thing is respect. So assuming that the person writing the code has good intentions and critiquing the code, not the person, I think a lot of PR reviews can kind of get into a combative state where you might leave a comment, the person getting it might be a bit defensive and ends up being a little argumentative. I think that kind of goes on both people, but I think if you're the reviewer, you're kind of the one initiating that conversation more or less. So you just always want to make sure that if you do catch an error, you're critiquing the code, because I found that's what helps people learn the most, where they can look at a piece of work and improve that work rather than trying to kind of work on themselves, because if PR reviews aren't really a time to be introspective about who you are as a person, I think that can kind of get a bit tricky. So you just want to make sure that you give them time to focus on the code and the real thing that you want them to fix. The next part is specificity. So not only can you be concrete and can you provide an example, but point to a specific line, describe the actual issue, and suggest the improvement. So instead of saying, oh, hey, I found this, it looks like this might be a problem, what do you think? You can say, oh, hey, on line 37, I see you're using this type of loop, or I see you using this default argument. It's gonna maintain its state, are you okay with that? And just being specific on the line, on the specific issue, and like why you think that's a problem. And not only pointing out the problem specifically, but also giving actual suggestions. And then the next part is explaining why. So don't just say what to change, but say why the change is an improvement. So going back to my other example, if they're passing in a default dict where they should be passing in none, you can say, hey, if you pass in a default dict, it's going to maintain its state over time. The memory might go up, and even though keeping the state might not be a problem, if the memory continues to go up, it's going to cause performance issue for your program. So being specific on what to change, why it's an issue, but also why the improvement that you're suggesting is an improvement overall. So I guess a few high-level takeaways. Python is a very expressive language, but when you're doing PR reviews, you want to make sure that you look out for not just working code, but Pythonic code. So not just, is this code working, is this code doing what it should be doing, but is this code doing it in the most Pythonic way? Is it going to be easy for us to maintain as a team in the future, where everything kind of has a standard format? Or, you know, if it's just working code, we're going to merge it, and then we're going to have 10 different bits of code that all do the same thing in slightly different ways, and that'll just be hard to maintain moving forward. But also, if you're a reviewer, making sure that you balance correctness with timeliness and with all of the other things we talked about. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're correct and that you're giving feedback that helps whatever code base and doesn't cause production issues and can roll out fine. But you want to make sure you do that in a constructive way so that you kind of build a team. I think PR reviews is a very obvious way of team building that I've seen people not take advantage of. But I think if you're doing PR reviews the right way, it helps engineers on your team feel more comfortable coming to you for questions, asking for help, or just making mistakes, because ultimately we all will end up making mistakes, but the more comfortable people are on your team with making the mistakes, but if they feel confident in you that if they do something wrong, you'll kind of catch it, you'll help them figure it out, that just makes for a better team dynamic. But then ultimately, like, why would you want to put in all this effort? Why do you want to do all this? It's so that you make a bigger impact as an engineer. I know my company has 9,000 engineers where we all work on a lot of different things all the time. We have a bunch of product requirements, and you're always writing code, testing, and doing all of this. But even with all of these opportunities, there's only so much code you can write yourself. There's only so many things you as an individual can design and contribute to. But I think if you're on a team and you're able to do PR reviews effectively, in a way, it's kind of like you help that code get from whatever state it was to being pushed out into production. And ultimately, that's just what you want to do. You want to be as impactful as possible, and PR reviews are a great way of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel, for an amazing talk. We have a little bit of time for questions. If anyone in the room would like to line up in front of the microphones. I mean, whilst we're waiting for the first individual to be brave enough to stand up, I've got a sample question. Sure. What was the best PR review you've ever had? What's the best experience you've had from a review?
The best experience I had from a review? I think the best experience I had was one where I got to talk to a senior engineer back when I was a junior. I remember initially I couldn't really I felt awkward asking a lot of questions, but there was one time where I was just like, hey, do you mind if we just like meet in person? I can ask you all my questions rather than us putting it on this PR. And that's what I did, and I think that just made me feel more comfortable asking them for help in PRs overall. But probably that one, just like talking in person.
Okay. Other microphone.
Hi, thank you. Much appreciated. I think very actionable indeed. One thing that I feel like thinking about this talk now is it's directed more, or at least to me, it feels like it has more the perspective of a senior developer or engineer giving advice or reviewing a PR of a more junior colleague. How does the advice that you have change, or what are the challenges? How would you deal with the reverse perspective where it's a more junior person reviewing a more senior code?
I think if you're a junior engineer, that's probably even a better opportunity because there's more of the stuff that you don't know. So I would say if you're a junior and you're doing PR reviews, that's a really good way to grow because if everything is new, you kind of look everything up and you learn a lot more. So I would say being a junior and doing PR reviews is probably an even better spot to be in than being a senior because you have more opportunities to learn. So I would say if you're a junior, maybe you can't leave as many impactful comments, but you can learn more so that eventually after maybe a year or 8 months, whatever, of doing it, you're then going to be in a position to leave impactful comments. So it might not start off that way, but like you just want to learn so that you can be in that position eventually.
Right, thanks.
Gentleman on the microphone on the right.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. It was really useful. The question is, when you are giving the feedback, there is sometimes an option just to suggest the change in the code, not commenting the line of code, but just put your version of the code. Do you have some opinion on that, on what cases it makes sense just to provide your version?
Yeah, this is just my personal opinion. I think if you're giving feedback with code and it's kind of what you're thinking in your head is harder to explain, and it's just easier if you just do it yourself, I think that's where it probably makes the most sense, where instead of explaining it in English, you just do it in code, and that way they could see exactly what you mean. So I tend to use it more for situations like that.
Thank you.
The microphone on the left.
I have two questions. So if somebody like submits a PR and it's like a lot of logic in one PR where you like worked on project for like, I don't know, really long time, how okay is it to say, like, I would not review it, please split it up, like that's too much?
I think that's not even a PR issue. I think that's a very good point. I think that's probably more of like a project management issue at that point where you shouldn't be doing all of these things in one PR, but you should be kind of working on them incrementally. So I wouldn't even say what you would say is correct. That's what I would do. I would say, hey, split this up. But I would say that's not even like a PR review problem. That's more of like a project management problem where you do things differently than just doing it all at once. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sometimes I come to this spot like too late, I think. Like it should be like beginning thing when you like start reviewing, I think. My second question is like, is it okay to have like different standards for different type of project? For example, for probably like client-facing project, you would have like more strict peer review, would enforce more tests. And when it's more kind of like some dashboard that you maintain is easier just to accept features, not kind of providing very thorough peer reviewer.
I think it might be tempting to do that where you, maybe for less important projects that aren't client-facing, you don't want to have your PR reviews follow the same standards. But if someone, like an example would be if someone is new on the team and they're looking for a way to do something and they see it in the less important code base and then they copy that and they do it in the more important code base, I think that just makes it kind of not standard. So I think ultimately you just want to make it as standard as possible where if something is being done and someone has to do the same thing, they can kind of look at it regardless of which code base it is and just be able to implement it. So I would say to stay away from that, although, I mean, different projects have different timelines and they require different things to get whatever out the door, but I would try to not do that as much as possible.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
And our final question, a microphone on the left with a shorter answer if possible.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, do you imagine not using formatter and linter before, making a code ready for code review?
I think people should do that, but I think your code base or CI/CD pipeline should allow you to know how to do that before you make it. I think if they're doing it on the first time and they didn't lint it when they could have, you just point that out. And if they keep doing that in the future, then that becomes a bigger issue. But yes, ideally they would do that before they make the PR.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much for your questions. Samuel will be available around if you ask him on Discord or online. And a fantastic time to do a PR review is at the sprints on the weekend. Next, at 3:15, we will have the panel and screening of Python the documentary. Please stick around in the forum hall. Thank you very much, Samuel. Thank you.